just to start and bring everybody at the same point, I think the last session was pretty great, where it was touched upon that AI is making a big difference. Today we're going to show you how that difference is coming about. So what is the gap that exists in the industry, and where and what people are doing, and then Richard will take you through some of the live examples. So before I get into the presentation, this is the app for the Slido. Please, if you have any questions, because I want to make this session more kind of Q&A type, so that if you have any idea, if you have anything that we have missed, please do shout out. Just a brief intro about the two of us. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the gap that exists in the execution, especially when it comes to AI. And I'll give why I say that gap, because of our research. And then Richard is going to talk about real-world sort of use cases and enablement. Just a background, I'm 23 years. I've had several companies in this space. But whole of my life, right from med school days to now, has pretty much about actually helping the frontline people, which is sales, commercial. Earlier it was in the patient side, and now it's actually in the commercial side. So I had several companies, ran several businesses, including some of the top MedTechs. And Richard brings that 20 years of experience working with the overall MedTech industry. So when you look at today, what's happening in our industry, right? There's not any singular world. Like, we don't live in a monolithic world. We are living in a world which is completely fragmented from a strategy perspective. If anything, it's not even, let's say, Europe versus America or versus APAC. It's actually hyper-regionalization. So you have US on one side, which, as you know, is budget-rich but margin-poor. The entire industry is going through a change in the US towards the ambulatory service centers and so on. So the care is moving towards home in the US, and you can see some of the top CEOs talking about that. In Europe, it's very regulation-driven. So we are, for the last 10 years, I think, living in a bit of a regulation drag, and that's kind of eating into how the industry is structured. But there are brilliant people here. It's the engineering talent of the world, right? And there is an opportunity actually in there. And then obviously there is APAC, which is growing very fast, but it's not really organized very well, right? So today, if you were to look at it, it's like there's no single playbook when it comes to AI, right? And this is the starting point. This is very important to understand that for AI to actually work, you have to operate at a regional level. You have to operate at the very local level. Now, some of the challenges that, you all know today what our industry is facing, right? So there is massive amount of regulatory overload. Like, you have all these regulations, GDPR, AI Act, and whatnot, And again, that's really dragging the overall margins. I know there's a purpose, and there's hopefully some sort of a reason behind so many regulations, but it is regulatory completely overload. Now, there's a talent problem and specifically in Europe. So I did a research, and last year we found out that it takes about 18 months to hire a person in the commercial space or in the product space in Europe. And it's just mind-boggling, that statistics. And then obviously there's extensive margin pressure. So you are hearing today about the trade wars and actual wars and reindustrialization. So you're talking about a recreation of an industry as we are seeing. Now, without systemic fixes to the core problems, we are actually not going to make any difference. So AI will just remain a mouth word. It's like nice to talk to in parties, but it's really not going to make any difference. When it comes to the capital itself, right, which is, so to speak, the driver, and this is where things are very interesting. I see this, specifically these numbers, it's so stark. So in Europe, we are not really deploying the capital. Firstly, we don't have the large capital base. Most of the capital sits in the US. As you can see, there's a huge difference. But whatever capital we have today is not even giving the right returns in Europe. There's a lot of waste. Overall, industry wastes a lot of capital. So every time you put $1, you only get $7 back in the industry. So there's a lot of waste, right? And this is because it's put into low yield opportunities. There's not a lot of data to drive that capital flow, and that causes a lot of downstream bottlenecks. Now, my suggestion to pretty much people who are in the strategy function is to rewire that capital, to put it into areas where it will make the largest transformative impact, such as in sales, in marketing, in commercial. There is already a lot of capital going in the R&D space. Last year I was in Advamed. There was a discussion that said that actually, if you compare the R&D output of a large MedTech versus a small or a mid-sized MedTech, it's actually 10 cents on the dollar. It's really poor from a return point of view in the R&D space. Most of the new innovation is brought in from, so to speak, by buying companies out. That has been the traditional model of the last 20 years. Now, what's also changing on the product side, and most of you are very familiar with, right? There is this whole momentum from device-based business to a data-based business, right? And you saw that in digital health, in robotics, right? So the world is shifting. Now, all hardware operators today, if you're not investing in data, in software, you're actually going to be creating someone else's margin for tomorrow. And that has been going on for a while. And you can see the difference in the valuations of a typical traditional MedTech company, and you see the valuations of a robotic company, for example, or a digital health company. It's a difference of like 20x. So again, prioritize investments in platform and invest in capabilities that will allow you to bring software and data to the forefront of it, because that data is needed for all the actions. This is a beautiful kind of slide, which I really love. It not only compares what we are doing in the industry, but also with the other industries that are actually out there. So as you can see, there are areas where generative AI is making an impact. But when it comes to really the front line, that's where there's a 16-point gap, right? We are massively behind in how we leverage that for our frontline teams. And this gap is not a technology gap. I'll reiterate, there's enough tech out there today in the world that we don't have to invent anything for the next 30 years. It's just that we are very poor in how we actually use that tech. And the commercial execution gap is really ginormous, right? So what that really means is that we are still living a legacy, which is old sales models, door-to-door selling, and you probably are going to hear BCG giving a presentation now on the milkman model, right? So we are still living that old world, whereas underneath our world has completely shifted. I give an example of some of our customers as well. I used to speak to a lot of hospital CEOs, and on one hand, we have iPhones, right? So we're living a life, and then we do faxes. So, I mean, that's the disconnect that we have. And MedTech is better, that we don't have at least the fax problem, but we still have a technology and a data problem. Again, idea would be to make sure that when your go-to-market teams and your commercial teams can actually work with AI, right? So you have to also make sure the investment that is going in that direction is first in the data layer, and then in making sure that people have the right skills and resources, and then possibly in getting to the AI, which I'll talk a little bit. Now, I mean, just by show of hands, how many of you are using any form of generative AI as I speak today? So majority of you, right? But you'll be surprised, actually, these are not sanctioned AI, because many of our research has shown that 51% of all AI is shadow AI. It's not approved, it's not governed. You using ChatGPT or Claude is actually the biggest risk to your organizations. If you don't have systems that are properly governed, data models that are not built on the industry's foundations, the data is not safe. I can tell you now, I'll repeat that. Your data in ChatGPT is not safe. It is being trained again and again, and there are ways to now access that data depending on how you have typed it. If you have good prompt and your teams are actually typing in Claude and ChatGPT, I can actually pull that data out, what that strategy is. So just be very mindful of that. When we build systems, on our side, we actually invest in making sure that data is completely anonymized and going to an LLM model. Without that, you're completely exposing your future strategy. Now, this is where it gets very interesting. This is also an opportunity to codify these generative AI workflows, right? So not doing it in a decentralized manner, because once it becomes decentralized, the whole plot will be lost forever. And again, create a governance playbook, give the tools to the teams that are really trying to bring AI in-house, because that's where maximum amount of value will come out. Now, this is amazing to see. Like, I wanted to understand today across all the companies, so we looked at about 250 organizations, and we want to understand where AI is making a difference and where we are lagging behind. So as you can see, in Europe, the main area where we are lagging behind is in the commercial space, right? There's a lot of AI in the R&D side, in the diagnostics, for example, but in the commercial space, there's a huge gap, and that's where investment should go in. In the US, there are so many projects, and I'm sure you'll hear from your US colleagues, that they're failing at scale and not getting any value out of it, so there is over-investment in some areas in the US. But here, there's a huge opportunity to segment ourselves out from what other regions are doing. This is an opportunity for Europe, and it's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of an opportunity. Now, if you look at where money is going and delivering value, and this is where for me, it's a very personal thing, because as you can see, when money is wasted in our industry, as someone from a clinical background, for me, that's actually money taken from the patient. So today, if you see, there are some very big programs, and I hear we have done about 300-odd conversations in the last, let's say, a year or so on generative AI with various companies. Some of you are in the room as well. What we are seeing is there are these corporate vanity programs that are running because someone said somebody or they met some CEO somewhere in some conference and like, yeah, let's invest in a big giant corporate platform for generative AI, and it gives 0 results to anybody. It is just a glorified chat GPT or a Copilot, which is great to look at, but it doesn't really solve any problem. Where it's really making an impact is really tight, narrow use cases. So for example, the largest impact that we have seen is in the pricing and revenue intelligence space. You take the data on your historical performance on your accounts, you look at the pricing gaps, and you, boom, have a strategy. You can actually have better discounting. You can have better tender win rates. And those are smaller projects, but we saw a huge amount of impact to the top and bottom line. And there's obviously vanity projects like, for example, let's create all the content with AI, right? Which is obviously the most common thing. Again, unproven ROI at the moment. And what it leads to is that when you start on a project like that, eventually the teams get burnt out because they're not getting very value out of it. I remember a story of one of the companies, I can't name the company, and the EVP said to me that we have completely burned our hands with AI. We think we have done these projects and we have not seen any ROI, people have wasted their time. So you can see, you can almost lose faith in that, but that's actually not the result of the AI itself, but it's actually you're not focusing it on the right areas. So again, my advice would be kill all the projects that don't make sense to the EBITDA. Do narrow work and deliver high value. And many of you will hear now, the world is moving from this large language models to highly customized small language models, which can give very targeted results as well. So you'll see that's where the future is headed in agentic action, in actions where our regular manual workflows that we have, how we can automate those things with highly targeted data. Now, to deploy AI, first thing is you need a very strong data foundation. And most of you here would acknowledge or at least agree with me that our data foundation is very poor. So as an industry, we are data rich, right? And I love this comment from Mark Benioff from Salesforce, which he said that Salesforce itself has 260 petabytes of federated data available, which the customers never use, right? So we have ERP systems, we have CRM systems, we have CPQ, and whatnot. We have data overload, but it's not connected. It's not making sense because it doesn't connect the customer to the interaction, to the contract, to the pricing. It's all over the place in many, many, many different systems. That means it never gives any value. I still see people in a lot of companies, they have spreadsheets that they're maintaining, and they're managing 5 different systems. And that's really bad for our business. An average productivity of a commercial person in Europe is actually 30%. That's documented in proof points, because amount of time it takes for them to really update internal systems is mind-boggling. And then again, having analytics to enforce that layer is super critical to drive any AI adoption. Now, where we step in, right, just to give you a bit of a view, we have looked at all the gaps, and build a template where instead of taking just any large language model, we have adapted the models to very specific use cases, such as, for example, in your sales enablement processes, right? Automating your entire tender process end to end. 80–90% of that task is fully automatable now, right? Understanding the rep and helping the rep understand where to target. Then about price and revenue intelligence, which I give you a little bit of insights about. In analytics of the competition, so tracking like net pricing, ASPs across 100 different countries, and then obviously in the automation of the content itself, where we have invested in capabilities. Now, wherever we are coming in, we always start very small because that's where we see the biggest impact, not some giant, big corporate platforms. Now, I have spoken to you a little bit about the gaps in the execution. I've also shown a little bit about where we are trying to play. Now, let me pass on to Richard, who's going to take you through real-life examples and showcase to you what it means to have AI in the organization.
Thank you very much, Praful. Really appreciate it. So, what I want to kind of walk through here is, and by the way, I could not have asked for a better setup for this specific talk than what the chairman of BCG just walked through. I mean, we are going to get exactly into some of the examples that he talks about, and I've got some data to support what he says as well. But I just want to take a step back for a minute, and I want to ask everyone, if you can picture yourself 5 or 6, 5, 10, whatever years from now, where do you think you're going to be on this AI journey, right? Are you going to be a person and/or organization that does not adopt it? Are you going to be a person or organization that is very far ahead in it, right? I think people need to think through and start engaging with their organization and the stakeholders to understand how this landscape is shifting around us. It's going to happen, right? And we're going to talk about this through concrete examples. So first off, when we look at what enterprises are doing globally, and this is a report commissioned by Microsoft, so I've deliberately gone third party for some of the data here. They're looking at investing about $246 billion USD, with growing to about $749 billion by 2028. So that's a 30% growth on artificial intelligence going forward. If your organization is not doing it, that's every other organization that is. And I think that's a key takeaway from this. You're going to have to start somewhere. And second, for every $1 US that an organization invests, the return on investment, specifically in healthcare, is about 3.3. So when Praful mentions that about every employee is operating about a 30% productivity, you can see how this really starts to lever up any organization. And again, as Richard Lasser mentioned before, we know that everyone is looking to improve their productivity. So what I'm going to go through is a very quick overview on the healthcare supply and demand side, more at an operational level. Then I'm going to talk very quickly about the improving the MedTech commercial excellence, followed by 3 case examples, okay? And hopefully we can get some questions into Slido, so I do encourage everyone to put them in and we can address those afterwards. So I've adapted a slide that I use at almost every single talk, and I've now adapted it to reflect this 4th industrial revolution. But many of you, if you've seen me speak before, will know that I always bring everything back to these 3 system challenges. Number 1 is aging populations and rising prevalence of chronic illness, okay? Number 2 is the funding and financing of healthcare, which I frankly think is one of the biggest risks to public health systems. And then the third one is universal and equitable healthcare access. Every stakeholder in the healthcare ecosystem has to juggle this. If you're not juggling those, you're going to be leaving someone or some patient behind, and I think that's what's at the heart of all of this. And then this easy solution that I always talk about is value-based healthcare, but it's very easy to conceptualize theoretically. It is incredibly difficult to implement once you actually get onto the ground. And a big part of that is the underlying data, which we can talk about for a minute. But as we all know, value-based healthcare is some ratio of outcomes versus costs, okay? We see HTA organizations doing it, we see payer organizations doing it, and we see companies in the MedTech industry engaging with these organizations overall. Now, we have to encapsulate this in this 4th industrial revolution, which is really what we're here to talk about today, all right? And underneath this 4th industrial revolution are sort of 3 key pillars. Number 1 is digital and AI literacy. Organizations and individuals, frankly, are not digitally literate enough to engage with that massive amount of investment that's going into artificial intelligence. We speak with people almost on a daily basis who are not quite sure what to do with the artificial intelligence that they want to implement. And that's a critical barrier to this enablement. The second one is the digital infrastructure itself, and where I take a big step back. I'm not a tech guy. Everyone in my family's in tech. I listen to tech people talk, and I have no idea what they're talking about. But the infrastructure that underlying all of this, we see data silos, we see lack of interoperability. These are huge barriers that need to be overcome and are slowly making their way into healthcare systems. And then the third one is this industry security and transformation, cybersecurity risks. How do we adapt for the external macro variables that we see out there? And all of this creates this massive storm of complexity that MedTech companies need to adapt to, okay? And that's why I want to get into some of the core challenges. And we've already started to talk about this, but specifically for the MedTech industry, we know regulation is a challenge. But I'm also shocked that in the regulatory side of things, everyone always focuses on MDR and IVDR. And I'm not taking away from how big of an issue they are. They are absolutely massive. But there's other regulation that we need to adapt to as well, whether it be HTA regulation, which is just going live now, and how that's going to be implemented, no one is really quite sure. The procurement regulation that is starting to change, whether it be through the most economically advantageous procurement directive. We see sustainability regulation coming in. We see AI, GDPR, a whole plethora of regulations that come in. But when I hear regulatory challenges, or when I say regulatory challenges, I am not only referring to MDR and IVDR. There's a whole subset of other regulations out there as well. Second one, which relates to the universal equitable access. Number one, how do you ensure equal access across systems? We see some very, very innovative technologies that are not making their way into smaller regions or to subsets of various countries from an innovation and access perspective. And that leads to questions about how do you launch your technologies? Do you go for a smaller geography first that might be more favorable to innovation, or do you go for a larger market which is much more complex to go into? So that's the sort of the strategic dilemma that we start to see. Sustainability. I have a big focus on sustainability in everything that I do. Why? Because we have to confront this challenge, which I do believe is a bit of an existential threat to the planet itself. Without the planet, we don't have patients. Without patients, we don't have the healthcare industry, and we lose it all. And then, of course, the AI and digital medtech. So not only is it about digital systems and artificial intelligence enabling medtech, but it's also the shift of the technologies themselves that need to be evaluated. So that would be things like AI-driven system efficiency. We see things like robotics, genomics, and of course, personalized medicine. All of these changes and challenges are what need to be adapted again in the context of this fourth industrial revolution. So I paint this picture purely to highlight how aligned we are to the complexity of the system that we're seeing. So the question really becomes, where do we go from here, okay? So again, as Praful alluded to earlier, what's really important is that if you're going to undertake an artificial intelligence journey within your organization or even with yourself, it's really important to highlight that 80% of AI projects do not deliver any value, okay? And the RAND did an interesting report on this, which I would encourage everyone to take a read. And the four main reasons are, first off, lack of collaboration, which is not surprising when you see the data silos and the data hierarchies that we see within the healthcare systems themselves. Second one is lack of talent, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But again, the digital literacy of individuals and organizations is just not there yet, but we do see it starting to catch up. Poor data quality. Again, in healthcare, we see this all the time. Payers ask for more robust evidence. The data quality to appropriately assess a market is never quite clear, so poor data quality becomes an issue. But most importantly, it's unclear business objectives. Not everyone says, yeah, I want to do AI, it's going to improve productivity, but the objectives themselves are not quite clear. And when you link these back to the other ones, in particular lack of collaboration, you end up almost setting yourself up for failure. Before you undertake any artificial intelligence project, make sure the objectives are clear and they're organizationally aligned. So as your organization is looking at establishing the objectives on AI, whether it be at the entire organization or even silos within your organization, two key objectives repeatedly came up within the top countries. And we look worldwide, we can see employee productivity and top-line growth. These are clear ways to measure this. And we're going to talk about some examples specifically of employee productivity with respect to the tender market, okay? And even if you do align those objectives, again, it's the workforce talent and the lack of skilled workers which can become a challenge. So if you're not enabling the employees within your companies to really learn about how to use artificial intelligence, what exactly it means, how to use it, and all the various subsets of that, you're going to have a challenge. Moreover, I believe there's also a generational issue as well, whereby we see younger individuals coming into organizations which are far more digitally literate than the teams that they are looking to join. And that definitely creates a bit of a mismatch, okay? So a critical first step to individual and organizational maturity really can be some form of AI governance, okay? We recommend putting some form of internal AI governance structure into your organization to guide and provide input to all the other functions that are there. And we'll talk about one in the example of a pricing committee in just a moment. But really, when you look at where the leaders versus the laggards appear in terms of AI implementation, the leaders clearly have got some form of governance in place to drive the implementation and the digital enablement that we see, okay? So when we bring this back to payer engagement, when we bring this back to market access, when we bring this back to regulatory and all the various commercial functions, okay, commercial excellence really starts to begin on an AI perspective when you do the first thing, which is to understand the data sources that you need to access. Where are you going to for that data, and how are you linking them together? The second one is how to standardize that data. So at Vamstar, we're going through about 86,000 sources, 40 million documents per day to really drive the analytics. But I can assure you, when you go through 40 million documents, they do not all look the same. They do not all have the same format. They don't have all the same terminology and coding. Therefore, you have to standardize that so you can even begin to train your artificial intelligence model, okay? Now, whether that be documents within organizations or whether that be documents that you're going external for, the standardization is typically not there. Now, once you have that LLM training undertaken and the data is standardized, then it's moving from data to insights, right? You're building that platform, you're building the data sets, you then need to make sure that you're looking at how to turn that data into insights through some form of dashboard, which then sets you up very nicely for generative AI and predictive analytics coming off of those, right? Where we see companies struggle is it really in steps 2 and steps 3, where they're doing an awful lot very manual, okay? Offload that, allow your people to think strategically such that you can get into the more operational and strategic artificial intelligence enablers as we see, right? And that's where you get the conventional sort of unmet need definition, you have the product lifecycle management, and so on and so forth, all right? But enabling these 4 pillars to drive your commercial excellence strategy will really set your organization up forward. So let's get into the first case example, which is tender RFP bottlenecks that we often see, okay? Anyone who's dealt with anyone in procurement knows that it is an incredibly time-consuming endeavor, okay? So 90% of tender teams still collect the information manually, okay? And if it's not entirely manual, there are certain areas that can be automated on that. Again, if you've got an AI tool to go through and extract those data points from external sources, you've taken an awful lot of work off the table. Moreover, when we see the workload on the individuals, and this is where the employee productivity thing starts to really come in, 6 people, 200 emails with 0 automation and how those tenders are being managed. And therefore, there's lost margin because the winning bids are often 18% higher than the second bid. So it begs the question, what happens to that 18% that's being left on the table? So this type of a solution drops directly to the bottom line vis-a-vis pricing, and we'll talk about pricing in just a moment. So when you look at some of the solutions that Vamstar can put in place, so we see things like auto opportunity indexing, right? So rather than having a team manually do that, drop that directly into your CRM such that you can follow up with responses thereafter. Product auto matching, so how do you align SKUs to various procurement decisions that are out there, right? How are you optimizing what your products fit versus the various tender decisions out there? Technical bid filtering, so responses are auto-filled from prior ones, so you can start to match things up more effectively. And then also price prediction, which is coming back to that margin compression that we start to see on the first versus second winner tenders. And then last but not least, risk identifiers, right? So flagging those risk tenders with renewal or compliance issues that may be starting to come up, all right? But when you walk through this example, this really takes an awful lot of pain off of the table, which is driven by that automation, which ultimately delivers the value for the organization. So that's case 1 on tender management. Automate as much as you can, unleash your employees' productivity, and then start minimizing the margin that's lost between the first and second bidders. So now, a lot on this slide. I'm not going to go through all of it, but what I am going to highlight is how artificial intelligence can simplify everything that you see on the screen, right? So if you look at a typical pricing strategy, if you will, starts off with potentially your pricing policy, right? So what is the policy that your organization has in place to drive your pricing decisions? Second one is, who are the people that are going to do that? That's your pricing committee. And then the third one, of course, are the pricing analytics, okay? Now, if we go down the side here, we have a pricing model. So what is the pricing model that your organization is looking at implementing, whether it be a cost plus, whether it be a pricing strategy, whether it be share of category, whatever it happens to be. But that pricing model will really drive a lot of the actions. Second one is the pricing process and how that links back to the organizational KPIs. And then, of course, very critically is the organizational alignment. But where artificial intelligence can really take hold is in the areas that you see here. So whether it be the pricing policy itself, again, making sure that AI counsel is embedded into that pricing policy as a key contributor. It's embedding AI to recommend various ASPs for the pricing committee to have discussions on. How much of that could be automated? How much of that committee's time can be saved? These analytics and dashboards can come into this. So really, the AI-enabled actions come down to three key areas. Number one is embedding the AI council into the strategic pricing strategy and committee. It's sandboxing potentially the agentic AI solutions that you might be putting in place and measuring those against what you might do manually. That might sound like a regression on everything we've just said, but by establishing that proof of concept and establishing the benefit of what agentic AI is doing can really allow you to quantify the difference that you're putting in place. And then, of course, last but not least, is measuring AI solutions against the metrics that you've put in place. Without measuring something, it's hard to identify how well it's built. But that really gives you a quick overview on how AI can be embedded into a pricing strategy as an example. Another one that takes an awful lot of time, anyone who's done a systematic literature review or built a global value dossier knows that they can be incredibly time-consuming from a literature review perspective. So establishing that PICO table, doing the literature review itself, going through all of those articles. In some cases, if it's a very prevalent illness, let's take diabetes as an example, you end up with a ton of information that you have to go through. Screening abstracts can be incredibly time-consuming. So what AI can do is it can break down that global value dossier process and really start to save time, in particular in these early stages. And we estimate that we can save approximately 28 to 86 days of a global value dossier creation, just from predominantly driven by this one step. Once you actually grade the evidence through the requirements, then artificial intelligence needs to take a bit of a step back. The human in the loop really needs to come into the process of this. And then by the time you map the value evidence, the economic modeling, and the actual clinical and economic assessment, AI can be a partner in that, but I do not believe at this stage it should be leading it. But the time savings that you can pick up from the early stages of a global value dossier are really quite powerful. And again, the time saved is approximately 70% of the total effort that needs to go into it, we believe that AI can offload. Again, these are big time savings from a resource and from a financial perspective. So the final one, and as I mentioned earlier, ESG, in particular environmental sustainability, is incredibly important. Many of you may have seen this. Vamstar was commissioned to do a report for MedTech Europe on the tender criteria in ESG. But what we see is that when we get through the Scope 1, the Scope 2, and the Scope 3 emissions, it's incredibly data intensive. I was just speaking at a conference on Monday on this exact topic, and the key takeaway from that conference is just how complicated measuring, mapping, and doing something about your carbon footprint is incredibly time-consuming and complex. As a quick fallback to make sure everyone's on the same page, Scope 1 emissions, those are direct emissions emanating from healthcare facilities and healthcare-owned vehicles. Scope 2 is where you buy your energy from, okay? And then Scope 3, which is the really complicated one, that's everything in your supply chain, okay? Anyone, just a quick show of hands, who here has done a supplier engagement forum for their supply chain to specifically understand the supply chain carbon footprint and what their partners are doing about it? Just by show of hands, who's done a supplier engagement for? So I'm seeing one hand, and now I'm sure there's some of you who have not put your hand up, but understanding your supply chain is going to become crucial. For example, in the UK, PPN 0621 now mandates that you have to do a carbon reduction plan. If you look through the details of that form, what you'll see is that they're actually asking what you and your suppliers are doing to minimize their carbon footprint, okay? Without having that in place, you've really put your entire UK business at risk potentially, because without that, you technically do not qualify for any procurement decision in the United Kingdom, or England specifically. Moreover, when you factor in how you have to systematically map and measure that over time, again, the data really starts to accumulate. So having artificial intelligence coded specifically to ESG criteria is something that artificial intelligence can really lever up. So the analysis that we went through from MedTech Europe to enable and support on this really comes down to the 15,000 tenders that are driving the European ecosystem for this analysis. So what we did was looked at the ESG landscape and policy analysis, and the scope of work was really to identify the key criteria of identifying the leaders and the laggers throughout the countries and how they were moving forward. And the results was really quite interesting. So ESG adoption has risen from about 5 to 7% of most procurement decisions. Okay. There are common patterns in language that are emerging, but there's still some harmonization that needs to happen, whether you go national, local, even within regions, within countries, all of that language is slightly different. And the insights were quite powerful. And we can see that some countries, such as the Nordics, France, the United Kingdom, those are definitely the leaders, but other countries are starting to come up very quickly. And if you have not looked at how this system is changing, then from a commercial operational perspective, then there is some potential business risk there. But again, leveraging artificial intelligence to really drive these insights is something that can take a lot of time off of the table. So, now we're going to talk very quickly about what some of the winners can do to turn them into their competitive advantage. So, Praful?
Yeah. Just to summarize, I think, as you saw, we wanted to show you real-life examples of how AI is being used. I know many of this subject is very heavy. From the conceptual side, there's a lot of talk about AI. So now you saw concrete examples. Now, first thing you'll see from us, which is our core recommendation, is make AI embedded into your core business model. It's not just about one part of the organization, but if you really want to leverage and make a change, which is needed now in the way we are in the industry, then AI has to be centrally embedded into your business model. So start thinking that today.
Thanks. Yeah. And then, of course, the second one, which I spoke to, is the regulatory access and fluency as well, right? So how do you embed this, and how do you make this a data-driven process as opposed to more anecdotal and one-off, less structured one? So, but that can come in a very short period of time. So.
Then I guess the most important piece in this, as I think last time also it was highlighted, is the people part of it, right?
Yeah.
We have a problem. In 15 years, the state of the industry and the amount of people that will be available will be severely limited. Not only people are not joining MedTech, but they're actually leaving MedTech industry. A lot of the veterans are retiring. There's a huge gap in the leadership layer as well. So we have this perfect storm that's going to come down in the next decade or so, which is if we don't train and coach our people, don't bring them up to speed with the new tools, because the work is only going to get complex, but at the same time, we will not have the right talent. So it's super important to have a talent strategy in place that knows, that understands and leverages artificial intelligence.
And the next one is the bold and innovation portfolio shift, right? So how do you go through your product lines and divest of those that are not profitable or going to drive the business going forward, right? Again, what we see through all of the external changes is a tremendous amount of opportunities for companies to consolidate and lever themselves up going forward. And that's more of a medium-term type of solution. So.
And then lastly, customization of the AI. So right from product features, which I think we do a good job in taking our product that is set up in one country and customizing to the local audience, such as local payers, local patients. But same thing I think we've got to do with the AI, because the opportunity is huge, but the chance of missing out on the opportunity is even bigger. So today, if I were to leave you with one question, that would be ask yourself, ask your teams, ask your leaders in your organization, how are we going to leverage the AI moving forward and launch this new industrial revolution for our industry?
Yeah, thanks, Praful. So now let's open it up to some question and answers. We've either answered everyone's questions, but there's nothing in Slido. So let's get some discussion going. I mean, there's got to be something, right?
Oh,
so whilst that's queuing up on the Slido slide there, I'm going to ask Praful one question. Praful, I mean, so Vamstar, you've been doing this since approximately 2019. What makes you different? Like why? I mean, we hear all this chatter about artificial intelligence. Everyone's saying we can do the next best thing. Well, what's the differentiator for you? So.
Yeah. I think so. The premises of setting up the company was primarily, I mean, 2019 was not an AI year, as many of you would know. Nobody was talking about AI. We started to see the trends way ahead of time, saying that the data muscle of the industry is the weakest point, right? So we started building systems to connect the data. Think of it as the Palantir specifically for the MedTech industry. So all the stuff that we did, which led up to the AI evolution, was the idea that how do you connect internal data systems together? And those are small wins that we had at the beginning. We chose very specific problems in the organization, such as, for example, the tenders, the pricing problem. And then we started training, specific language models. So today in the industry, we are the only player that has a very specific language model that is tuned for the commercial processes and is also not leaking your data.
Thanks. And then the next question is, when you think about the artificial intelligence councils themselves, what do the structure of those look like? Who's inputting to them, and how do they make decisions, and how do they go about things?
I think it's a very good question. I've had like two different feedbacks. I won't name the name of the companies. Company A very large conglomerate, and they set up this AI council where every single EVP wanted to be a part of that, and it didn't do anything. There were like 11 VPs fighting for the best say in that council, and it didn't go anywhere. That's one example of an AI council. But then there are AI councils that have been deployed where actually you have people from cross-functional team leads that have joined up, and there are groups. So a global AI council, then you have regional chapters of the AI council, for example, the ones driving European transformation, the ones driving the Asia transformation, and those are delivering tremendous value. It's the composition, it's how you're bringing the teams together, the leads together, and then what type of processes you have set to educate on how to deploy AI across the organization. That makes a big difference.
Yeah, thanks. And then the sort of, when we look at and we saw it from the speaker from BCG earlier, the whole topic of the external environment, right? So tariffs, we see, as quite accurately said, you don't know what's going to happen one day to the next, let alone one quarter or 1 year on year. How do you feel the ability of AI to drive decision-making in that environment can significantly support organizations? So, what are your thoughts on how that actually plays out?
Again, great question. When it comes to the world, right? I mean, we had fairly good, I would say, pre-COVID. I mean, for those of you who remember in the MedTech, it was a fairly good year, like the golden decade of MedTech, as I call it. COVID changed that, right? Our world became completely fluid, highly dynamic, volatile. And when you look at that world, every action that we were doing before that we're taking lightly, let's say leaving 18% margin between your bids, would take very lightly in the previous world. Now it's actually really detrimental to the business. So what we are seeing is actually, if the world is going to get more fragile, which we all know, even if, let's say, you get some certainty from, let's say in the US, but we know it's not going to be the same. The relationships have changed, the structures have changed. And now the only thing you can do is factor that into your calculus and deploy right solutions to capture that. Like, have a better understanding of what's going to happen and then take quick action. I think one area where we are very, very poor, at least from the commercial side of the industry, is slow action. We take a long time to react to it. It's maybe the nature of our industry. It is risk averse, right? But the world we are in requires us to be a little bit more agile. And I know it's a very heavy word, and it sounds like, yeah, we are very agile. But that's why if you look at the spheres of the world between Europe, Asia, and the Americas, this is an opportunity now to start making action towards that. And you're seeing in all sectors, by the way. Not just us. It's in a way a gift by the US that we have to think about Europe. We have to start thinking about what is our future, because that's what is at stake at the moment.
Yeah. And that's exactly the last question, bringing it back to European competitiveness. Where would you rank European ecosystem in terms of potential competitiveness if artificial intelligence is enabled?
Yeah. I think, again, very good point. And as you saw from the previous speaker, I mean, he brought up China and US, right? The two giants. And it didn't there was no mention of Europe anywhere. There was just a slight mention that maybe there is a scope for Europe to do certain in innovation space. But this is where I see things very differently. I think, firstly, there's an opportunity in the commercial side. We have the biggest sector that is aging, that will go through a change and transformation, and the opportunity space is very large. But if we stay fragmented, and if we have, somebody else will come and do that, then the whole opportunity will be missed. The competitiveness is only going to happen if you take action now, like right now. Because tomorrow it'll be too late.
Yeah. And then the final question. what are the 3 things companies should ask any potential AI provider to make sure that they're going with the right partner?
It's a very good question. The first thing I would say is, what's happening to my data? Am I leaking it? Because if most likely they are going to take your data and do something with it. So please be very conscious of that. And our data in our industry obviously has a huge amount of IP embedded in there, right? Second is how easy it is to deploy something or use something. For me, I think the use cases are big. You can do a ChatGPT, but is ChatGPT really the best use case for AI? Because you're going to get bored with it. How many of you constantly get bored by the same answers? Why is AI not doing things constantly automatically? So that's very important. The second is the use. And the third is the insights that are coming out, can it be validated? Can you validate? Can a human being who has already done this can actually back that up? So this human-in-the-loop operation should always be there. There should not be an autonomous AI, because it's not just us, but it's also our patients' lives at risk. And without those 3 elements, any AI will not make a big impact.
Thank you. And I always say that, Microsoft Excel did not put accountants out of business, right? So anyone who's operating with artificial intelligence has to provide that overlay. But thank you very much, Praful. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Really appreciate your time. We do have a room right beside Auditorium 2. If you have more questions, please do come and talk with us. The number is, what room number is that? It's
110.
Anyways, we got big banners out front. You can come and talk to us if you want. You'll find us. But thank you, Praful. Really appreciate it. So thanks.
Thank you.